Although we call rewards and punishments the two hinges upon which all government turns, yet I could never observe this maxim to be put in practice by any nation except that of Lilliput. Whoever can there bring sufficient proof that he has strictly observed the laws of his country for 73 moons has a claim to certain privileges, according to his quality and condition of life, with a proportional sum of money out of a fund appropriated for that use. He likewise acquires the title of Snilpall, or legal, which is added to his name, but does not descend to his posterity. And these people thought it a prodigious defect of policy among us when I told them that our laws were enforced only by penalties, without any mention of reward. It is upon this account that the image of justice, in their courts of judicature, is formed with 6 eyes, 2 before, as many behind, and on each side 1, to signify circumspection, with a bag of gold open in her right hand, and a sword sheathed in her left, to show that she is more disposed to reward than to punish. In choosing persons for all employments, they have more regard to good morals than to great abilities. For, since government is necessary to mankind, they believe that the common size of human understanding is fitted to some station or other, and that Providence never intended to make the management of public affairs a mystery to be comprehended only by a few persons of sublime genius, of which there seldom are 3 born in an age, but they suppose truth, justice, temperance, and the like, to be in every man's power, the practice of which virtues, assisted by experience and a good intention, would qualify any man for the service of his country, except where a course of study is required. But they thought the want of moral virtues was so far from being supplied by superior endowments of the mind, that employments could never be put into such dangerous hands as those of persons so qualified, and at least that the mistakes committed by ignorance in a virtuous disposition would never be of such fatal consequence to the public weal as the practices of a man whose inclinations led him to be corrupt, and who had great abilities to manage, to multiply, and defend his corruptions. In like manner, the disbelief of a divine providence renders a man incapable of holding any public station. For since kings avow themselves to be the deputies of Providence, the Lilliputians think nothing can be more absurd than for a prince to employ such men as disown the authority under which he acts. In relating these and the following laws, I would only be understood to mean the original institutions, and not the most scandalous corruptions, into which these people are fallen by the degenerate nature of man. Ingratitude is among them a capital crime, as we read it to have been in some other countries. For they reason thus, that whoever makes ill returns to his benefactor must needs be a common enemy to the rest of mankind, from whom he has received no obligation, and therefore such a man is not fit to live. Their notions relating to the duties of parents and children differ extremely from ours. Their opinion is that parents are the last of all others to be trusted with the education of their own children, and therefore they have in every town public nurseries, where all parents, except cottagers and laborers, are obliged to send their infants of both sexes to be reared and educated when they come to the age of 20 moons, at which time they are supposed to have some rudiments of docility. These schools are of several kinds, suited to different qualities and both sexes. They have certain professors well skilled in preparing children for such a condition of life as befits the rank of their parents and their own capabilities as well as inclinations. The cottagers and laborers keep their children at home, their business being only to till and cultivate the earth, and therefore their education is of little consequence to the public. But the old and deceased among them are supported by hospitals, for begging is a trade unknown in this empire. And here it may perhaps divert the curious listener to give some account of my domestics and my manner of living in this country during my residence of 9 months and 13 days. I made for myself a table and chair, convenient enough out of the largest trees in the royal park. 200 sempstresses were employed to make me shirts and linen for my bed and table, all of the strongest and coarsest kind they could get, which, however, they were forced to quilt together in several folds, for the thickest was some degrees finer than lawn. Their linen is usually 3 inches wide, and 3 feet make a piece. The sempstresses took my measure as I lay on the ground, one standing at my neck and another at my mid-leg, with a strong cord extended that each held by the end, while a third measured the length of the cord with a rule of 1 inch long. Then they measured my right thumb, and desired no more, for by a mathematical computation, that twice round the thumb is once round the wrist, and so on to the neck and the waist. And by the help of my old shirt, which I displayed on the ground before them for a pattern, they fitted me exactly. 300 tailors were employed in the same manner to make me clothes, but they had another contrivance for taking my measure. I kneeled down, and they raised a ladder from the ground to my neck. Upon this ladder one of them mounted, and let fall a plumb line from my collar to the floor, which just answered the length of my coat, but my waist and arms I measured myself. When my clothes were finished, which was done in my house, they looked like the patchwork made by the ladies in England, only that mine were all of a color. I had 300 cooks to dress my victuals in little convenient huts built about my house, where they and their families lived, and prepared me 2 dishes apiece. I took up 20 waiters in my hand, and placed them on the table. 100 more attended below on the ground, some with dishes of meat, some with barrels of wine and other liquors slung on their shoulders, all which the waiters above drew up, as I wanted, in a very ingenious manner, by certain cords, as we draw the bucket up a well in Europe. A dish of their meat was good mouthful, and a barrel of their liquor a reasonable draught. Their mutton yields to ours, but their beef is excellent. I have had a sirloin so large that I have been forced to make 3 bites of it, but this is rare. My servants were astonished to see me eat it, bones and all, as in our country we do a leg of a lark. Their geese and turkeys I usually ate at a mouthful, and I confess they far exceed ours. Of their smaller fowl, I could take up 20 or 30 at the end of my knife. One day, His Imperial Majesty, being informed of my way of living, desired that himself and his royal consort, with the young princes of the blood of both sexes, might have the happiness, as he was pleased to call it, of dining with me. They came accordingly, and I placed them in chairs of state upon my table, just over against me, with their guards about them. Flimnap, the Lord High Treasurer, attended there likewise, and I observed he often looked on me with a sour countenance, which I would not seem to regard, but ate more than usual in honor of my dear country, as well as to fill the court with admiration. I have some private reasons to believe that this visit from His Majesty gave Flimnap an opportunity of doing me ill offices to his master. That minister had always been my secret enemy, though he outwardly caressed me more than was usual to the moroseness of his nature. He represented to the emperor the low condition of his treasury, that he was forced to take up money at a great discount, that exchequer bills would not circulate under 9% below par, that I had cost His Majesty above 1.5 million sprugs, their greatest gold coin, about the bigness of a spangle, and, upon the whole, that it would be advisable in the emperor to take the first fair occasion of dismissing me. I am here obliged to vindicate the reputation of an excellent lady who was an innocent sufferer on my account. The treasurer took a fancy to be jealous of his wife, from the malice of some evil tongues, who informed him that her grace had taken a violent affection for my person, and the court scandal ran for some time that she once came privately to my lodging. This I solemnly declare to be a most infamous falsehood, without any grounds farther than that her grace was pleased to treat me with all innocent marks of freedom and friendship. I own she often came to my house, but always publicly, nor ever without 3 more in the coach, who were usually her sister and young daughter, and some particular acquaintance. But this was common to many other ladies of the court, and I still appeal to my servants round whether they at any time saw a coach at my door without knowing what persons were in it. On these occasions, when a servant had given me notice, my custom was to go immediately to the door, and after paying my respects, to take up the coach and 2 horses very carefully in my hands, and place them on a table where I had fixed a movable rim quite round of 5 inches high, to prevent accidents, and I have often had 4 coaches and horses at once on my table, full of company, while I sat in my chair, leaning my face towards them, and when I was engaged with one set, the coachman would gently drive the others round my table. I have passed many an afternoon very agreeably in these conversations. But I defy the treasurer or his 2 informers to prove that any person ever came to me incognito except the secretary Reldresal, who was sent by express command of his Imperial Majesty, as I have before related. I should not have dwelt so long upon this particular, if it had not been a point wherein the reputation of a great lady is so nearly concerned, to say nothing of my own, though I then had the honor to be a nardac, which the treasurer himself is not, for all the world knows that he is only a glum-glum, a title inferior by 1 degree, as that of a marquis is to a duke in England. Yet I allow he preceded me in right of his post. These false informations, which I afterwards came to the knowledge of by an accident not proper to mention, made the treasurer show his lady for some time an ill countenance, and me a worse. And although he was at last undeceived and reconciled to her, yet I lost all credit with him, and found my interest decline very fast with the emperor himself, who was indeed too much governed by that favorite. An account of my leaving this kingdom may properly be prefaced by some particulars of a private intrigue which had been for 2 months forming against me. I had been hitherto all my life a stranger to courts for which I was unqualified by the meanness of my condition. When I was just preparing to pay my attendance on the Emperor of Blefuscu, a considerable person at court came to my house very privately at night in a close chair, and, without sending his name, desired admittance. I put the chair, with his lordship in it, into my coat pocket, and, giving orders to a servant to say I was indisposed and gone to sleep, I fastened the door of my house, placed the chair on the table, according to my usual custom, and sat down by it. Observing his lordship's countenance full of concern, and inquiring into the reason, he desired I would hear him with patience, in a matter that highly concerned my honor and my life. His speech was to the following effect, for I took notes of it as soon as he left me. "You are to know," said he, "that several committees of council have been lately called, in the most private manner, on your account, and it is but 2 days since his majesty came to a full resolution. You are very sensible that Skyrish Bolgolam, High Admiral, has been your enemy, almost ever since your arrival. His original reasons I know not, but his hatred is increased since your great success against Blefuscu, by which his glory as admiral is much obscured. This lord, in conjunction with Flimnap, Limtock the general, Lalcon the chamberlain, and Balmuth the grand judiciary, have prepared articles of impeachment against you for treason and other capital crimes. Out of gratitude for the favors you have done me, I procured information of the whole proceedings and a copy of the articles, wherein I venture my head for your service. Articles of impeachment. Against Quinbus Flestrin, the Man Mountain. Article 1. Whereas by a statute made in the reign of His Imperial Majesty Calin de Farplun, it is enacted that whosoever shall make water within the precincts of the royal palace shall be liable to the pains and penalties of high treason, notwithstanding the said Quinbus Flestrin, in open breach of the said law, under color of extinguishing the fire kindled in the apartment of His Majesty's most dear imperial consort, did maliciously, traitorously, and devilishly put out said fire kindled in said apartment. Article 2. That the said Quinbus Flestrin, having brought the imperial fleet of Blefuscu into the royal port, and being afterwards commanded by His Imperial Majesty to seize all the other ships of the said empire of Blefuscu, and reduce that empire to a province, to be governed by a viceroy from hence, and to destroy and put to death not only the big Indian exiles, but likewise all the people of that empire who would not immediately forsake the big Indian heresy. He, the said Flestrin, like a false traitor against His most auspicious, serene imperial majesty, did petition to be excused from the said service upon pretense of unwillingness to force the consciences or destroy the liberties and lives of an innocent people. Article 3. That whereas certain ambassadors arrived from the court of Blefuscu, the said Flestrin did, like a false traitor, aid, abet, comfort, and divert the said ambassadors, although he knew them to be servants of a prince who was lately an open enemy of His Imperial Majesty, and in an open war against His said Majesty. Article 4. That the said Quinbus Flestrin, contrary to the duty of a faithful subject, is now preparing to make a voyage to the court and empire of Blefuscu, for which he has received only verbal license from His Imperial Majesty, and, under color of the said license, does falsely and traitorously intend to take the said voyage, and thereby to aid, comfort, and abet the Emperor of Blefuscu. In the several debates upon this impeachment, it must be confessed that His Majesty gave many marks of his great lenity, often urging the services you had done him, and endeavoring to extenuate your crimes. The treasurer and admiral insisted that you should be put to death by setting fire to your house at night, and the general was to attend with 20,000 men, armed with poisoned arrows, to shoot you on the face and hands. Some of your servants were to have private orders to stew a poisonous juice on your shirts and sheets, which would soon make you tear your own flesh and die in utmost torture. The general came to the same opinion, so that for a long time there was a majority against you, but His Majesty, resolving to spare your life, at last brought off the chamberlain. Upon this incident, Reldresal, principal secretary for private affairs, who always approved himself your true friend, was commanded by the emperor to deliver his opinion, which he did, and therein justified the good thoughts you have of him. He allowed your crimes to be great, but that still there was room for mercy. However, in obedience to the command he had received, he would freely offer his sentiments. That if His Majesty, in consideration of your services, and pursuant to his own merciful disposition, would please to spare your life, and only give orders to put out both your eyes, he humbly conceived that by this expedient justice might in some measure be satisfied, that the loss of your eyes would be no impediment to your bodily strength, by which you might still be useful to His Majesty. This proposal was received with the utmost disapprobation by the whole board. Bolgolam, the admiral, could not preserve his temper, but rising up in a fury said he wondered how the secretary durst presume to give his opinion for preserving the life of a traitor, that the services you had performed were, by all true reasons of state, the great aggravation of your crimes, that you, who were able to extinguish the fire in Her Majesty's apartment, which he mentioned in horror, might at another time raise an inundation by the same means, to drown the whole palace, and the same strength which enable you to bring over the enemy's fleet might serve upon the first discontent to carry it back, that he had good reasons to think you were a big Indian in your heart, and as treason begins in the heart before it appears in overt acts, so he accused you as a traitor on that account, and therefore insisted you should be put to death. The treasurer was of the same opinion. He showed to what straits His Majesty's revenue was reduced by the charge of maintaining you, which would soon grow insupportable. That the secretary's expedient of putting out your eyes was so far from a remedy against evil that it would probably increase it, as is manifest from the common practice of blinding some kind of fowls, after which they fed the faster and grew sooner fat. His sacred Majesty and the council, who were your judges, were in their own consciences fully convinced of your guilt, which was a sufficient argument to condemn you to death, without the formal proofs required by the stricter letter of the law. But His Imperial Majesty, fully determined against capital punishment, was graciously pleased to say that since the council thought the loss of your eyes too easy a censure, some other may be inflicted hereafter. And your friend the secretary, in answer to what the treasurer had objected, concerning the great charge His Majesty was at in maintaining you, said that His Excellency might easily provide against that evil by gradually lessening your establishment, by which, for want of sufficient food, you will grow weak and faint, and lose your appetite, and consume in a few months. Thus, by the great friendship of the secretary, the whole affair was compromised. It was strictly enjoined that the project of starving you by degrees should be kept a secret, but the sentence of putting out your eyes was entered on the books, none dissenting, except Bolgalem, the admiral, who, being a creature of the Empress, was perpetually instigated by Her Majesty to insist upon your death, she having borne malice against you on account of that infamous and illegal method you took to extinguish the fire in her apartment. In 3 days your friend the secretary will be directed to come to your house and read before you the articles of impeachment, and then to signify the great lenity and favor of His Majesty and council, whereby you are only condemned to the loss of your eyes, which His Majesty does not question you will humbly submit to, and 20 of His Majesty's surgeons will attend, in order to see the operation well performed, by discharging very sharp-pointed arrows into the balls of your eyes as you lie on the ground. I leave to your prudence what measures you will take, and to avoid suspicion, I must immediately return in as private a manner as I came. His lordship did so, and I remained alone, under many doubts and perplexities of mind. It was a custom introduced by this prince and his ministers, that after the court had decreed any cruel execution, either to gratify the monarch's resentment or the malice of a favorite, the emperor always made a speech to his whole council, expressing his great lenity and tenderness as qualities known and confessed by all the world. This speech was immediately published throughout the whole kingdom, nor did anything terrify the people so much as those encomiums on His Majesty's mercy, because it was observed that the more these praises were enlarged and insisted on, the more inhuman was the punishment, and the sufferer more innocent. Yet, as to myself, I must confess, having never been designed for a courtier either by my birth or education, I was so ill a judge of things that I could not discover the lenity and favor of this sentence. but conceived it rather to be rigorous than gentle. I sometimes thought of standing my trial, for, although I could deny the facts alleged in the several articles, yet I hoped they would admit of some extenuation. But having in my life perused many state trials, which I ever observed to terminate as the judges thought fit to direct, I durst not rely on so dangerous a decision in so critical a juncture, and against such powerful enemies. Once I was strongly bent upon resistance, for while I had liberty, the whole strength of that empire could hardly subdue me, and I might easily with stones pelt the metropolis to pieces. But I soon rejected that project with horror by remembering the oath I had made to the emperor, the favors I received from him, and the high title of Nardak he conferred upon me. Neither had I so soon learned the gratitude of courtiers to persuade myself that his Majesty's present severities acquitted me of all past obligations. At last I fixed upon a resolution. I confess I owe the preserving of mine eyes and my liberty to my own great rashness. Hurried on by the precipitancy of youth, and having his Imperial Majesty's license to pay my attendance upon the Emperor of Blefuscu, I took this opportunity, before the 3 days were elapsed, to send a letter to my friend the Secretary, signifying my resolution of setting out that morning for Blefuscu, pursuant to the leave I had got, and, without waiting for an answer, I went to that side of the island where our fleet lay. I seized a large man-of-war, tied a cable to the prow, and lifting up the anchors, I stripped myself, put my clothes, together with my coverlet, which I carried under my arm, into the vessel, and drawing it after me, between wading and swimming, arrived at the royal port of Blefuscu, where the people had long expected me. They lent me 2 guides to direct me to the capital city, which is of the same name. I held them in my hands till I came within 200 yards of the gate, and desired them to signify my arrival to one of the secretaries, and let him know I there waited his Majesty's command. I had an answer in about an hour, that his Majesty, attended by the royal family and great officers of the court, was coming out to receive me. I advanced 100 yards. The emperor and his train alighted from their horses, the empress and ladies from their coaches, and I did not perceive they were in any fright or concern. I lay on the ground to kiss his Majesty's and empress's hands. I told his Majesty that I was come according to my promise, and with the license of the emperor my master, to have the honor of seeing so mighty a monarch, and to offer him any service in my power, consistent with my duty to my own prince, not mentioning a word of my disgrace, because I had hitherto no regular information of it, and might suppose myself wholly ignorant of any such design. Neither could I reasonably conceive that the emperor would discover the secret while I was out of his power, wherein, however, it soon appeared I was deceived. I shall not trouble the listener with a particular account of my reception at this court, which was suitable to the generosity of so great a prince, nor of the difficulties I was in for want of a house and bed, being forced to lie on the ground, wrapped in my coverlet. 3 days after my arrival, walking out of curiosity to the northeast coast of the island, I observed about half a league off in the sea somewhat that looked like a boat overturned. I pulled off my shoes and stockings, and wading 200 or 300 yards, I found the object to approach nearer by force of the tide, and then plainly saw it to be a real boat, which I supposed might by some tempest have been driven from a ship. Whereupon I returned immediately towards the city, and desired his Imperial Majesty to lend me 20 of the tallest vessels he had left, after the loss of his fleet, and 3,000 seamen under the command of his vice-admiral. This fleet sailed round, while I went back the shortest way to the coast, where I first discovered the boat. I found the tide had driven it nearer. The seamen were all provided with cordage, which I beforehand twisted into sufficient strength. When the ships came up, I stripped myself, and waded till I came within 100 yards of the boat, after which I was forced to swim till I got up to it. The seaman threw me the end of the cord, which I fastened to a hole in the forepart of the boat, and the other end to the man-of-war. But I found all my labor to little purpose, for, being out of my depth, I was not able to work. In this necessity I was forced to swim behind and push the boat forward as often as I could with one of my hands, and the tide favoring me, I advanced so far that I could just hold up my chin and feel the ground. I rested 2 or 3 minutes, and then gave the boat another shove, and so on, till the sea was no higher than my armpits. And now, the laborious part being over, I took out my other cables, which were stowed in one of the ships, and fastened them first to the boat, and then to 9 of the vessels which attended me. The wind being favorable, the seamen towed, and I shoved, until we arrived within 40 yards of the shore. And waiting till the tide was out, I got dry to the boat, and by the assistance of 2,000 men with ropes and engines, I made a shift to turn it on its bottom, and found it was but little damaged. I shall not trouble the listener with the difficulties I was under by the help of certain paddles which cost me 10 days making to get my boat to the royal port of Blefuscu, where a mighty concourse of people appeared upon my arrival, full of wonder at the sight of so prodigious a vessel. I told the emperor that my good fortune had thrown this boat in my way to carry me to some place whence I might return into my native country, and begged his majesty's orders for getting materials to fit it up, together with his license to depart, which, after some kind expostulations, he was pleased to grant. I did very much wonder in all this time not to have heard of any express relating to me from our emperor to the court of Blefuscu. But I was afterward given privately to understand that his imperial majesty, never imagining I had the least notice of his designs, believed I was only gone to Blefuscu in performance of my promise, according to the license he had given me, which was well known at our court, and would return in a few days when the ceremony was ended. But he was at last in pain at my long absence, and after consulting with the treasurer and the rest of that cabal, a person of quality was dispatched with the copy of the articles against me. This envoy had instructions to represent to the monarch of Blefuscu the great lenity of his master, who was content to punish me no farther than with the loss of mine eyes, that I had fled from justice, and if I did not return in 2 hours, I should be deprived of my title of Nardak and declared a traitor. The envoy added that in order to maintain the peace and amity between both empires, his master expected that his brother of Blefuscu would give orders to have me sent back to Lilliput, bound hand and foot, to be punished as a traitor. The emperor of Blefuscu returned an answer consisting of many civilities and excuses. He said that as for sending me bound, his brother knew it was impossible, that although I had deprived him of his fleet, yet he owed great obligations to me for many good offices I had done him in making the peace. That, however, both their majesties would soon be made easy, for I had found a prodigious vessel on the shore, able to carry me on the sea, which he had given orders to fit up, and he hoped in a few weeks both empires would be freed from so insupportable an encumbrance. With this answer, the envoy returned to Lilliput, and the monarch of Blefuscu related to me all that had passed, offering me at the same time, but under the strictest confidence, his gracious protection, if I would continue in his service, wherein, although I believed him sincere, yet I resolved never more to put any confidence in princes or ministers, where I could possibly avoid it, and therefore, with all due acknowledgments for his favorable intentions, I humbly beg to be excused. I told him that I was resolved to venture myself on the ocean rather than be an occasion of difference between two such mighty monarchs. Neither did I find the emperor at all displeased, and I discovered that he was very glad of my resolution, and so were most of his ministers. These considerations moved me to hasten my departure somewhat sooner than I intended, to which the court very readily contributed. 500 workmen were employed to make 2 sails to my boat, according to my directions, by quilting 13 folds of their strongest linen together. I was at the pains of making ropes and cables by twisting 10, 20, or 30 of the thickest and strongest of theirs. A great stone that I happened to find after a long search by the seashore served me for an anchor. I had the tallow of 300 cows for greasing my boat and other uses. I was at incredible pains in cutting down some of the largest timber trees for oars and masts, wherein I was, however, much assisted by His Majesty's ship carpenters, who helped me in smoothing them after I had done the rough work. In about a month, when all was prepared, I sent to receive His Majesty's commands and to take my leave. The Emperor and royal family came out of the palace. I lay down on my face to kiss his hand, which he very graciously gave me. So did the Empress and young princes of the blood. His Majesty presented me with 50 purses of 200 sprugs apiece, together with his picture at full length, which I put immediately into one of my gloves to keep it from being hurt. The ceremonies at my departure were too many to trouble the listener with at this time. I stored the boat with the carcasses of 100 oxen and 300 sheep, with bread and drink proportionable, and as much meat ready dressed as 400 cooks could provide. I took with me 6 cows and 2 bulls alive, with as many ewes and rams, intending to carry them into my own country and propagate the breed, and to feed them on board I had a good bundle of hay and a bag of corn. I would gladly have taken a dozen of the natives, but this was a thing the Emperor would by no means permit. And besides, a diligent search into my pockets. His Majesty engaged my honor not to carry away any of his subjects, although with their own consent and desire.
End of Side 3.